How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Infinite Sports. I'm your host, Kenneth Grunfelder, to cover a lot of stuff today. WBC stuff, as well as NFL free agency. Ton of moves yesterday. Of course, some moves made today as well. We'll get into that in a little bit. I did want to talk about the WBC. As you can see, I got my WBC hat representing the USA. They're 3-0. They're going to be moving on to the quarterfinals. Japan has moved on. I believe Korea has also moved on. The Dominican Republic, they'll be moving on as well. Although big matchup tomorrow between the two unbeaten teams. You got the DR facing off against Venezuela, so that's going to be a heck of a matchup as well. I mean, I'm really looking forward to, as we get further into the tournament, get to see, the Goliaths going at it, like the USA, the DR, Japan, these teams, also Puerto Rico as well, another team that's going to be moving on. I'll say this, the tournament, everybody's invested, right? Fans are invested, the players, you could tell, very passionate about it. I mean, especially with, some of these teams like the Dominican Republic. I mean, they are really into this tournament. And I know it's definitely sparked some conversations with, the showboating, with the celebrating, and how, oh, maybe it's a little bit too over the top. I mean, the players are having fun with it. And I know for me, sometimes it does get a little too much, but this happens particularly when it's done against a team you're rooting for. Like, I know from watching the Yankees all these years, I mean, sometimes with the Rays, with Randy Arozarena, when the Rays would do that after they hit a home run, they get to third base and then they cross their arms and they look into the dugout. Like, you're like, all right, just cross home plate. Like that. At times it gets a little bit excessive, but honestly, let them have fun. They're playing for their country, which is something that all the players really have been very vocal about, playing in this tournament for their country. They love it. And there's a different kind of meaning to it as opposed to, when they're playing for their major league teams, right? There's something different when you're playing for your country, you're representing your country. And the other thing too is when talking about, the theatrics, when, teams do something in a game, there's been some criticism towards the US side, like, "Oh, they're too boring, they're too buttoned up, they don't do that much, when they do something." So it's like you can't win. It's either too much or not at all. But, the USA, when they do something, when Judge hit the home run yesterday, he looked into the dugout, he was pumping the guys up. So, it's done in different ways. Okay? So I don't disagree. I don't agree with that. But I definitely have been locked into this. In the past, it's definitely something that was more background noise. I would put it on, but this time around, I'm definitely invested in it, and especially because you have all the stars really playing in it, like Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, Fernando Tatis, Shohei Ohtani, Vlad Guerrero Jr., Paul Skeens. I mean, you go up and down the list of the marquee players that are playing in this tournament. It's got you invested. Now, Tarek Skubal, to talk about him briefly. So he was really only, I mean, this ended up happening anyways. He still ended up going back to Detroit to finish up his spring training. But, he thought this was going to be kind of just like, an exhibition. He didn't really know what to expect from this. And after his only start with the USA team, he kind of, had a little bit of a debate within himself on whether he should stay or go back. I mean, he did end up going back anyways, but it did make him pause for a moment, just how the vibes from this tournament, pitching in this tournament, it made him reconsider to maybe stay, but he ended up going back. I think if he was really just going to pitch for one game, probably shouldn't have went in the first place. But again, he didn't realize what the vibes are going to be within this tournament. So, but this is a contract year for him. He's going to get paid a ton of money by somebody. It's not going to be the Tigers, it looks like. So, he's going to go back, finish up his spring training, and then he'll be ready to go once the major league season starts. And he's going to be, one of the top pitchers in baseball and could be up there for a Cy Young. Again, contract year, he's going to get paid a ton of money. But I really like where this tournament is at. again, I'm really looking forward to the matchups later in this tournament, and then that gets all started next week. You get to the semifinals this weekend, quarterfinals, semifinals, and then the championship, and then week after that, it's going to be the start of the major league season, and it could be the last, you know, hurrah before the impending doom of the lockout. So, got to savor every moment with this baseball season. But like I said, the tournament it's been very good, but again, looking forward to what's coming later on with the quarterfinals and with what the potential matchups could be with these teams. So yeah, that's what the WBC has got for us right now. Some more games today, tomorrow, and then the quarterfinals will be after that. So we'll see how that all plays out. But now that we got the WBC talk out of the way, let's get into talking about free agency in the NFL because we had a ton of moves that I'm going to try to cover the best I can. I'm going to try to go through almost every team because some teams they just re-signed their guys. They didn't really go out and get free agents elsewhere. So I'm going to cover the big moves that were made from over the weekend because there were some trades also from over the weekend I wanted to get into and some of the other moves as well. So one move that was made over the weekend was the Raiders trading Maxx Crosby to the Ravens for 2 first-round picks. First rounder for this season and next season. Love this move for the Ravens. Now, Crosby is definitely, getting a little bit older, getting up there in age, but is still one of the premier pass rushers in the NFL. And he's kind of, been stuck with the Raiders for his career. The team never really was competing for anything. They did have that playoff appearance, back in 2022. But other than that, the Raiders have kind of been towards the bottom of the NFL. And, especially after what happened when the Raiders kind of sent Maxx Crosby packing, with the injuries that he was dealing with, they kind of shut him down and he wasn't happy about that. You knew that was kind of the end for his time in Vegas. And now he goes to the Ravens who, they need some help on that defensive line. Need somebody that can get after the quarterback, and Maxx Crosby can definitely still do that. Again, is the price a little bit steep? Yes, but the Ravens, you have a window. You got to try to win now because Lamar Jackson's prime isn't going to last that much longer. And you have this window to try to go out there and win a championship. And Maxx Crosby is a guy that you bring in to try to do that. And you have now another defensive minded head coach in Jesse Minter. And the Ravens defense has been a pretty good unit. 2023, obviously, they made it to the championship game. They kind of took a step back last year, but again, this is a guy you bring in to get after the quarterback and to try to get yourself over the hump. And I really do like this move. Again, price a little much, with the 2 first, but he's the player. He's one of those players that you go out and you try to acquire. And that's what the Ravens did. So I was for that move. Now, they did lose guys in free agency. They lost Linderbaum to the Raiders. The Raiders were pretty busy. They were pretty active over the last day or so here in free agency. They also lost their punter to the Giants. We'll talk about the Giants. I really like what they've done here. And they also who else? They also lost Isaiah Likely to the Giants as well. Actually, and they also lost a corner to the Giants. So they lost quite a few players to the Giants, but that's because obviously with Harbaugh now over there leading the charge. But yeah, so to kind of go through it, actually, we'll actually speak of the Giants. Speaking of the Giants, since I have them as one of the first teams I wrote down with all their moves. So they got Isaiah Likely. Love this move for the Giants. The Giants have really needed a tight end that's a threat, in the passing game, and I feel like that's definitely been lacking for years. I mean, they thought they were going to get that with Darren Waller when they got him a few years ago, but that obviously did not pan out. Isaiah Likely has kind of been not necessarily buried in the depth chart, but he's played second fiddle to Mark Andrews for quite some time. And, the times that Mark Andrews has missed games due to injury, Isaiah Likely has been productive. And I think this is a good spot for him to really break out, especially with the young quarterback in Jackson Dart. You bring him over 3 years, $40 million. Still, young tight end. You pair him up with Theo Johnson, another young tight end that showed some promise this past season. But I think Isaiah Likely could, take over and be that number one tight end. I do like this move, and with the lack of threats at wide receiver now, opposite of Malik Neighbors, the Giants need another pass catcher, and the Giants also have been one of those teams that's kind of reached out to the Jaguars because the Jaguars have been listening to offers regarding their wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. Now, Adam Schefter's kind of dismissed all that and said that the Jaguars really have no interest in trading Brian Thomas Jr., but we'll see. I mean, it's going to take, quite the price to acquire a player like him. But, based off of what I saw with Jacksonville last year, I mean, Travis Hunter got hurt, but, we'll see, how they handle his workload this upcoming season. If they lean more towards him playing defense as opposed to offense. But, you saw guys like Parker Washington really step up, and you also saw Jacoby Myers when they brought him over at the trade deadline, and they gave him some money. So Brian Thomas could be on his way out, maybe. But maybe they keep him. They try to figure it out. We'll see. But, you pair Brian Thomas Jr. up with Malik Neighbors. Well, we've seen that before. We've seen that before with their college days. So that would be a home run for the Giants. Now, I did see a tweet, and I do agree with this. Once his contract is up, I mean, and you obviously got to pay Jackson Dart at some point. If Jackson Dart turns out to be the guy, you're going to have Neighbors that you're going to have to pay. And then you kind of fall into the trap that the Bengals fell into, where you're paying the quarterback and you're paying two receivers. You don't want to necessarily do that. But Giants are going to have to address receiver position one way or another. I think it's probably going to end up happening, through the draft. Maybe they take a receiver with their first pick, or maybe they go with the defensive side. They brought in Tremaine Edmonds, which I really like, the linebacker from Chicago, on a 3-year, $36 million deal. They also did bring back Micah McFadden. So, maybe you go the route and you bring in Sonny Styles. If they want to do that, pair him up with Tremaine Edmonds. Caleb Downs, I know that's, maybe they want to do that. There's a lot of possibilities with what the Giants can do with their pick, or they could even trade down. So, but yeah, we talked about Likely, Tremaine Edmonds, the linebacker, that's a position of need for the Giants. That's a weakness of the team. He can do different things for you, help out in the running game, which is something the Giants were not very good at stopping last year. So that needs improvement. The secondary is also a huge weakness. Now, they did lose some guys. They lost Cordell Flott, who it looked like he was going to be coming back, but then the Titans swooped in last second and they signed him. So the Giants lose him, but they did bring in Greg Newsome, who did kind of struggle last season. Hopefully, Giants can get better production out of him. Secondary, again, was not a strength for the team last year. It's a major weakness. And they really do need secondary help. And hopefully they can continue to add to that. Like I said, they also did add the corner from the Ravens. But, the secondary was a problem. And like I said, they did bring back Micah McFadden on a 1-year deal. But overall, and they also did re-sign Jermaine Illuminor, their right tackle. That's a big move, bringing him back. Offensive line still, again, needs some work, but it's definitely in a much better position than where it has been in years past. Let's be honest. So, I mean, again, I really like what the Giants have done so far. There's still work that needs to be done, but they are definitely heading in a positive direction. And then you still got the draft, and there's still could be moves that are made. But to kind of rattle through some of these other moves, so Kyler Murray was released by the Cardinals. They're going to move forward with Jacoby Brissett as their starter. They also did bring in Gardner Minshew to back him up. Cardinals are obviously going to be looking for their franchise quarterback. elsewhere, within the NFL draft. So it's not going to be a great year for them. Although, listen, they do have some good pass catchers, a new head coach, but I guess they're going to be looking towards the draft following this one, um, potentially for their guy. They also did bring in Tyler Algier to add to the running back room that consists of James Conner and Trey Benson, two guys that are coming off of injury-riddled seasons. Algier, of course, has been backing up Bijan Robinson for a couple years. This is a chance for him to really show what he can do potentially as a lead back. It was a 2-year, almost $12.5 million contract. Yeah, not bad, not bad. He's a decent running back, but that's one move I wanted to highlight with the Cardinals. The Falcons, so they brought in some competition for Michael Penix. They bring in another Southpaw quarterback in Tua Tagovailoa. Now, is this a good spot for Tua? Yes, because you do have talent on the offensive side of the ball with Drake London, Bijan Robinson, arguably the best running back in the NFL, one of the best running backs in the NFL. Drake London, Kyle Pitts. It's not bad. However, listen, you're bringing in Tua to compete with Michael Penix, and you're essentially bringing in another guy that has an injury history. Now, Michael Penix has, history with knee injuries, and he's coming off of one from this past season. And Tua, he's, dealt with his history of concussions. And who's to say that can't rear its ugly head again? So, I feel like the Falcons, kind of just they're stuck right now. They could definitely win some games with either of these guys at the helm, but this is a team that's going to have a cap on the amount of wins that they can get with them, and with the injury concerns and also the inconsistencies as well. Even when Tua played last year, it wasn't great. So they're going to have their opportunities to compete for their starting job, and the better of the two is going to win out. But what is that going to do for the Falcons? It's, again, you're hoping, if you're a fan of the Falcons and obviously within the Falcons organization, that one of these guys really shows out. But for us on the outside, we're a bit hesitant on that because of the injury histories and the inconsistencies and the unknowns. Like, we still really don't know that much about Penix at the NFL level. But part of that is because he got hurt. So that's what the Falcons did. They bring him in on a 1-year deal. And how about the cap hit, the dead cap hit that the Dolphins are going to be hit with for the next 2 years? It's almost $100 million. That was a bad contract that they gave out to Tua. But, a couple years ago, 2023, had a very good year. So you felt forced to give him that contract, but I wouldn't have done that. So, speaking of the Dolphins, though, they did sign a quarterback. Having said that, letting go of Tua, they brought in Malik Willis on a 3-year, $67.5 million contract. Look, Malik Willis only had 6 career starts, but from what we've seen in his limited playing time with Green Bay, definitely looked like a different quarterback as opposed to, the time that we spent, watching him in Tennessee. Definitely a different guy. And obviously there's, some Green Bay connections over there, and, makes that spot makes sense for him. Now we're really going to get a chance to see what he can do as a starting quarterback. Can he be a guy? Can he be the next, Sam Darnold? Can he be the next, Baker Mayfield? A guy that finds a new home, and can succeed as a starting quarterback. We will have to see over the course of now, 17-game season. Can he do that? We'll see. I mean, look, you got Devon Achane, you got Jalen Waddle, you got some weapons there. It's going to be interesting, what happens there. We'll see if it works out. We'll see if it works out. Some of the other moves, the Panthers, a couple of defensive players they bring in. They signed Jalen Phillips, who played really well with the Eagles after the Eagles traded for him. Last year, he got a 4-year, $120 million contract. Then they also got Devin Lloyd as well, pretty good player from Jacksonville, 3 years, $45 million. So, Panthers add to the defensive side of the ball, making moves there. The Bears, after they lost their center to retirement, they traded for Garrett Bradbury from the Patriots. They also brought in Kobe Bryant and Devin Bush. Kobe Bryant, a safety, a 3-year deal, and Devin Bush, a 3-year, $30 million contract. Kobe Bryant's was 3 for $40 million. The Bengals brought in a couple of defensive players. They brought in Boye Mafe from the Seahawks, an edge rusher, 3 years, $60 million. Brian Cook was 3 years, $42.5 million. Again, with the Bengals, defense, defense, defense. That's what they need to shore up. Because if their offense can continue to be elite, which, when Joe Burrow is playing, that's going to be the case, they got to be able to get stops on defense. And that's something that they have struggled to do the last couple of seasons. And also, especially with Burrow going down last year, they really didn't have a chance. Flacco came in, played well, but it's just the defense, continues to be lackluster. And, now Trey Hendrickson's out there on the free agent market. He's going to be going somewhere, as far as I know, as I'm recording this. He hasn't signed anywhere just yet, but we'll continue to monitor that as we move along here. I'm just going to take a quick little look at social media in case I missed anything. Nothing as of right now. But moving right along, the Cleveland Browns made a couple of moves, signing Sheldon Rankins, defensive tackle, Quincy Williams, former Jet, linebacker. So a couple of moves for the defensive side of the ball, a couple of 2-year deals. They also traded for Titus Howard from the Texans, 3 years, $63 million extension they gave him. The Lions, so obviously they traded David Montgomery to the Texans, but they do bring in a veteran running back. They replace Montgomery with Isaiah Pacheco. So on Twitter, I'm seeing now, could it be now we go from Sonic and Knuckles to Sonic and Shadow? And, everybody talking about Pacheco's style of running. Listen, Pacheco, before the injuries kind of caught up to him, he wasn't that bad of a running back for the Chiefs. And maybe he can get back to that level of production, change of scenery, and a team that does love to run the football. And look, he's not going to be asked to be the main guy, obviously. That's going to be Jahmyr Gibbs. And, David Montgomery didn't really have as much of a role as he has had in years past, but that's because Jahmyr Gibbs is just so good with the season that he had. So, I think on a short-term deal, not bad for the Lions, veteran back. Again, the injuries Pacheco's dealt with, it's been kind of tough for him. So hopefully he can get some level of production back. We will see. The Colts, obviously they, gave Daniel Jones the transition tag. We'll see if anybody, wants to, give out a big offer to him. I don't think that's going to happen. The Colts are going to wind up, with Jones for next season. Again, I'm hesitant to give Daniel Jones any long-term deal because, again, it more so has to do with the injuries than anything else. Because, again, we saw last year he played well, in the system with the Colts. It's just, again, the injuries, with the broken bone and then the Achilles. I mean, it's just how many times is he going to get hurt? And the Colts are a franchise where it's been pretty tough to find that franchise guy since Andrew Luck retired. And, they're hoping that Daniel Jones is the guy, but you're taking a huge gamble. So we'll see. But they do bring back Alec Pierce, a 4-year, $116 million contract. Money definitely was a little much. I mean, Pierce is coming off of a career year, and they did trade Michael Pittman to the Steelers. So he's really going to be the number one wide receiver, and definitely had a good rapport with Jones. Really had a good rapport with all the quarterbacks that played for the Colts last year. So, it definitely was an overpay, but hey, they traded away Michael Pittman. Pierce is going to be asked to do more now in this offense, and you still got Josh Downs and Tyler Warren as well. The Chiefs, a couple of moves from them. So Travis Kelce's back. A lot of conflicting reports out there that he was going to test free agency, then he wasn't. But either way, whatever conflicting reports there were out there, let's be honest, we all know he was going back. to the Chiefs. It was either it's the Chiefs or bust. He's either going to stay with the Chiefs or he's going to retire. And he's going to come back for at least one more year. 5 touchdowns last year. Look, he's starting to slow down. I mean, I thought he was done after, the Super Bowl from, now a couple years ago against the Eagles. I just thought he was just checked out. But, it's still got a little bit of juice left. A little bit. But he's definitely slowing down. But they do bring in a guy that is not slowing down, and that's Kenneth Walker. They give him 3 years, $45 million. He got this contract based off of the postseason that he had. Had a very good postseason, of course, won Super Bowl MVP. The Chiefs have been very desperate in addressing the running back situation because it really hasn't been great. Really, for Patrick Mahomes' entire tenure as a starter. We had the years of Damian Williams and, Pacheco, obviously, before the injuries. But, yeah, it's been a struggle for the Chiefs the last couple of years. And Kenneth Walker definitely helps that. It definitely adds a dimension to the Chiefs' offense that they've been missing. So, again, you can have your issues with the price, but look, the Chiefs address the need. And, I think Kenneth Walker can, and excel in an offense with the Chiefs. And the Chiefs can get back to being who they are. And obviously, you're hoping Patrick Mahomes bounces back from the ACL, which I think he should with flying colors. I mean, it's Patrick Mahomes. So, I do like that move for KC. But again, you can have your issues with the price. The Raiders, like I said, they were busy. They got Tyler Linderbaum from the Ravens. So, with the assumption that they are going to draft Fernando Mendoza with the number 1 overall pick, that definitely helps because the Raiders' offensive line was not good. It was one of the worst in the league. And, with the number 1 overall pick and you're taking ideally your franchise guy, you want to make sure he's protected. They added Jalen Naylor from the Vikings on a 3-year, $35 million contract. Added some more defensive players, Kwity Paye, Nakobe Dean, and Quay Walker. 3-year contracts for those players. So that's what the Raiders have done. Again, that's a team that still needs a ton of work with their roster. But again, I think the Linderbaum signing, you like that, especially, bringing in a young quarterback. Interesting move by the Saints. So they bring in Travis Etienne on a 4-year, $52 million contract. Now that's kind of sparked the discussion of, well, what's going to happen with Alvin Kamara? I mean, listen, I think Kamara has worked well. It's definitely worked well for him when he has a running mate, right? The years with Mark Ingram, the years with Latavius Murray, and now especially with Kamara getting older, you need to have somebody else in there. Now, I think Kamara, it's still on the table. It's very much on the table that he could be moved on from. I think he does want to stay with the Saints. I feel like he's kind of made that known in the past that, he doesn't want to go anywhere other than with the Saints. But, I mean, if you have the opportunity to maybe get traded to a contender, I think you should take it, because again, he's getting up there in age. I still think he can do some things for you. But, yeah, no, I listen, Travis Etienne had a very good year with the Jaguars last year. I think he showed that he could still be a very good back. So, I like that move for the Saints. And we'll see what happens now next year. Tyler Shuck, I guess, could be the starting quarterback next year going forward. But, and then some of the other moves, one of the biggest moves, one of the biggest shocks, even though it kind of seemed more likely that he was going to be departing from his team, is Mike Evans. Signs with the 49ers, a 3-year, $60 million contract, $60.4 million contract. 49ers desperate for a wide receiver because, you got Juwan Jennings in free agency. Brandon Ayuk is on his way out. They're going to probably trade him somewhere. And, you're still waiting for Ricky Pearsall to really take off. And George Kittle, is not going to, I think could be ready for week 1 because obviously, he suffered the Achilles injury against the Seahawks, right? It was against the Eagles. It was against the Eagles in the wild card round. But listen, Mike Evans, he's getting older, but everybody's comparing him now to Devontae Adams. You know, it, how Matthew Stafford really benefited from having Devontae Adams in the red zone. All those 1 yard touchdowns. You're going to be able to do that with Mike Evans. And Mike Evans can still do a little bit more than that. He's a reliable target. Problem is the injuries, of course, and that's something that I brought up a gazillion times on the last show that I did. Injuries, they always seem to be a problem. But when Mike Evans plays, Mike Evans is productive, and again, with a wide receiver room that's pretty thin, he definitely helps that out a lot. And Brock Purdy's going to really rely upon him. And once you get everybody back healthy, Kittle's healthy, and you got McCaffrey, this offense is going to be pretty good. The defense was a big problem last year. It was, and it had a lot to do with the injuries. And now Robert Saleh is, with the Titans, so that's going to change. But you get Nick Bosa back and Fred Warner back. Even though I've seen Fred Warner's been a part of trade rumors, so we'll see if that ends up happening. Also, Dre Greenlaw was released by the Broncos, and that's one team that re-signed pretty much all their guys is the Broncos. Dre Greenlaw was released, so maybe the 49ers reunite with him, but somebody's going to pick him up. But listen, I like that move for the 49ers. And it does kind of make sense why Mike Evans left. There was definitely a level of frustration with how things ended off in Tampa, and it was not like the relationships went sour or anything like that. I think it was just I think it's just how the season ended. Tampa, and then obviously Mike Evans got hurt, but Tampa kind of collapsed, and again I saw the Mike Evans in the locker room post the loss to Atlanta. 3rd and 20, they had 3rd and 28, and if Tampa wins that game, Tampa's in the playoffs. And Todd Bowles' defense really let them down. I mean, and that's something that really needs help. And they made a couple of moves. They brought in Alexander Zaloni to help out on the defensive side of the ball, and they also brought in Kenneth Gainwell to replace Rashad White. Those are the moves that they made. But yeah, they're losing Mike Evans. But listen, they got a lot of wide receivers there. They got Chris Godwin, and then you got the young wide receivers, Emeka Egbuka, who got off to a really good start last year, and Tez Johnson and Jalen McMillan. Bucky Irving coming out of the backfield, and like I said, you bring in Kenneth Gainwell. They re-signed Kate Otten, and Baker hopefully stays healthy. Offensive line stays healthy. Tampa's offense is going to be good again next year, with or without Mike Evans. But you are going to miss his presence, obviously, and just because he meant so much to that city, and the consistency is the word I can use, obviously, for Mike Evans is consistency. Injuries caught up to him, obviously. He didn't get his 1,000-yard season that he usually gets, but it happens. But Mike Evans, I think when it's all said and done, he will return to Tampa and retire a buck. So, yeah, but that was definitely a shocker. Mike Evans going to the 49ers. Jets also were a bit active. They traded for Minkah Fitzpatrick in division trade with the Dolphins. Minkah Fitzpatrick, and there was like a pick swap, I believe, with that trade. They also brought in Dane Belton from the Giants. Demario Davis, who spent some time with the Jets prior to leaving to go to the Saints, a 2-year, $22 million deal. And they also signed Joseph Asai from the Bengals, a 3-year, $36 million deal. And also, they got their quarterback. So they traded for Geno Smith, and there was a pick swap with that within that trade. So they get Geno Smith back from the Raiders. I'll give you the specifics of the trade. So they got Geno Smith and a 7th-round pick from the Raiders in exchange for a 6th-round pick. So Geno goes back to where it all started. You were hearing reports that they could bring in both Geno Smith and Carson Wentz. Well, now they're looking to bring in Wentz as well. There's that Frank Reich connection. So it looks like we're going to have a quarterback room next year with the Jets with Geno Smith and Carson Wentz. Look, I mean, you look at some of the options that were out there. Now, Kyler Murray is obviously the best option, but Kyler Murray's not going to come to the Jets. Kyler's going to be most likely going to be going to the Vikings. That still hasn't happened yet. Listen, Geno Smith was not good last year. It was not good. I thought him going to the Raiders after what he did in Seattle, I mean, it was definitely an upgrade from what they had in years past. But Geno was not great. Turnovers, and he was, it didn't help that the Raiders' offensive line was not great. Now he's going to an offensive line that's a little more stable. The Jets did lose Vera Tucker to the Patriots, and also Romeo Doubs signed with the Patriots as well. But he's going to have Breece Hall. He's going to have Garrett Wilson. There's going to be some guys that he's going to have at his disposal over there. And again, a stable offensive line. I mean, are the Jets going to be as bad as they were this past season? I mean, right now I would say no. And again, they still got the whole draft to go. But a lot of Jet fans are just hoping that they're not good, and then they could tank and they get one of the top quarterbacks in the draft next year. It's amazing how Geno's now ended up back in a spot, back in New York. And, for both fan bases, that share the stadium, both teams that share the stadium, rather, and the fan bases, they know Geno all too well. And obviously from the Giants' perspective, he was the guy that replaced Eli Manning when the Giants decided to bench him for Geno Smith to play against the Raiders, coincidentally enough, in 2017. And and then obviously he's kind of bounced around since then. He was with the Chargers for a little bit. Then was with Seattle. And played decent when he got his opportunity. But again, the Raiders didn't really pan out. So now he's back with the Jets. And look, I mean, you added some veteran guys, to that side, to the defensive side of the ball. Again, they have something to build off of on offense. I don't know. We'll see how they are. We'll see what Aaron Glenn does in year 2. Again, still got the draft, but not huge moves that the Jets made, groundbreaking moves. But now we kind of have an idea of what the quarterback situation is going to be like. And is it going to be better than last year? Maybe. I mean, listen, they also had Brady Cook playing last year. I mean, it's, I think Geno and Carson Wentz is better than that. But again, is that really saying much? Not really. Steelers were busy at the deadline as well, moving on. They re-signed Asante Samuel Jr. to a 1-year deal. They also traded for Michael Pittman. Like I said, they gave him a 3-year extension as well. Jamel Dean, another corner, they bring him in on a 3-year deal. Rico Dowdle, who had a very good year for the Panthers, so he replaces Kenneth Gainwell. You pair him up with Jaylen Warren. Now it's really all about who's going to play quarterback for the Steelers. Is it going to be Aaron Rodgers? Listen, he was on the Pat McAfee show recently. Did he make an announcement? No. And I don't really want to, go through the whole, well, is he going to play? Is he not? Listen, I've said I think he's going to come back. At first, I said maybe not, but then Mike McCarthy came in, and then all of a sudden, he's had conversations with McCarthy. So I think Rodgers is going to come back. He's going to come back. As for the Pittman trade, I think he's still, a decent receiver. You pair him up with DK Metcalf. The Steelers' receiver room was one of the weakest in the NFL last year. So I think it's definitely gotten better. I like the Jamel Dean signing, bringing back Asante Samuel Jr. The secondary's kind of been a weakness for the Steelers in the past. And I think Enrico Dowdle coming off the season that he had, I thought it was a good move to replace Gainwell, and then they also re-signed one of their linemen, Sayamalu, as well. So that's what the Steelers did. And then for the Titans, because the Titans made a lot of moves too. Talk about them for a second. They brought in Mitchell Trubisky to back up Cam Ward. They brought in Daniel Bellinger and Wan'Dale Robinson, 2 former Giants. Combined, they paid over $100 million for both of these players. Wan'Dale got a 4-year, $78 million contract, and Daniel Bellinger 3 years, $24 million. I did like the moves they made on defense. They brought in John Franklin Myers, who has familiarity with Robert Saleh, 3 years, $63 million. Cordell Flott, they brought in 3 years, $45 million. Like I said, they kind of poached him from the Giants. It looked like the Giants were going to re-sign him, but not so much. And then they also brought in Alante Taylor, 3 years, $60 million with $42 million guaranteed. And, earlier in the offseason, not too long ago, they also traded for Jermaine Johnson. So 2 former Jets on the defensive line, Giant in the secondary. Titans defensive line might not be too bad. I like the addition of Wan'Dale Robinson, because Cam Ward needs another weapon. Listen, I don't want to say that like it's not going to work out, but I have like this strange feeling that the pairing of Brian Dable and Robert Saleh after the failures that they brought to New York, I don't know. I feel like maybe there's a chance it works in Tennessee because listen, Dable was good as an OC. Saleh is going to be in charge of the defense, and we know he can coach defense. They have the quarterback in place ideally. It's not the toughest division in the league. Maybe it works. I don't know. But it's just a meme, obviously, because you got two coaches that failed in New York. Now joining forces out in Nashville, and you expect it to fail. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe they find a little bit of success there. Let's not forget. Brian Dable did coach a team to the playoffs his first year. And Robert Saleh did wonders with the 49ers defense last year with all the injuries. Like they do bring some positive attributes to the table. It's just, as head coaches, they didn't work out. Now, but Saleh is the head coach of Tennessee, so he's getting a second chance, and Dable's, kind of taking a backseat and being the OC for the team. So I don't know. We'll see. I mean, look, I'm not guaranteeing anything. I'm not saying, oh, they're going to make the playoffs, but I think they could be a team that somewhat improves. Again, Cam Ward going into year 2. I know it's a new system that he's going to have to learn, but can't be as bad. Team can't be as bad as they were this past season. I think they could be a team that improves. That's just me. But I think that's pretty much it. The Romeo Dobbs deal, 4 years, $70 million. Yeah, that might have been a little too much. I know A.J. Brown's name is still being floated around. Maybe he doesn't get traded. I feel like he's going to get traded. I feel like his time in Philly's done, but only time will tell there. Listen, Romeo Dobbs, not a bad receiver. As a number 1 wide receiver, I don't really know, but we'll see. Patriots are not done yet. Maybe they go out and they add A.J. Brown, because that seems to be the team that has the most, that makes the most sense, just because of obviously the history with Mike Vrabel. But we will see. But that's pretty much it. We pretty much touched upon all of the moves that were made so far. Again, still more moves to be made. But there are teams I like what they've done. Like I said, I did like what the Giants did. Again, some surprises. Mike Evans, going to the 49ers. It's a good spot though to end up in and get a ton of targets. And then there's some teams that just really haven't made any moves. The Seahawks are a team that really hasn't made any moves. So the Eagles, they re-signed Jordan Davis. But other than that, they've kind of been quiet. The Cowboys, they traded for Rashawn Gary. So they pair him up again with Kenny Clark. Yeah, so they traded him for a 4th-round pick. They also signed safety of Jalen Thompson to a 3-year deal. Listen, Cowboys, another team, like the Bengals, defense. We're still waiting on them to pay George Pickens, a long-term deal. But look, Cowboys offense is going to be good next year. So the defense is going to have to, be better. If they're going to want to seriously be a competitive team, especially in the NFC. But we'll see how that goes. But yeah, that's pretty much all the moves. Let me know what you guys think. What were your favorite moves that teams have made so far? What team has kind of knocked it out of the park this offseason? What team do you think needs to do a little bit more? What team do you think got better? What team do you think got worse? Let me know. And also let me know about the WBC. Thoughts on that as we move along in that tournament. Also some quick basketball stuff. Watching the Knicks over the weekend. I mean, what a sloppy game they played against the Lakers. The turnovers. I mean, they just were not ready to play that game. Jalen Brunson also was trying to, get some fouls, and that just wasn't panning out. That ended up turning into turnovers. They've kind of been inconsistent. They win some games where you're like, wow, that was really impressive, and then they, play a game like that. Now, not to say the Lakers are a bad team, but they just were not ready to play that game. And that was also without LeBron. Lakers didn't have LeBron in that game either, but they should be getting him back hopefully soon. He's dealing with a bit of a foot injury, I believe. So, but yeah, that's where things are at right now. As always, everybody, make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe to the video, to the channel. Make sure to follow us on the social media platforms in the description below, also displayed on the ticker. And wherever you get your podcasts, you can follow us as well. Just look up Infinite Sports, and you'll find us there. And as always, everybody, I'm your host, Kenneth Grunfelder, signing off. Have a good one, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Take care.